If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
This is the inaugural episode in a series. Once again, this is Mindshock, the most comprehensive and exhaustive deep dives into true crime cases and other topics. So we'll be going over every aspect of the case, every suspect, every theory, in typical Mindshock fashion, with logic and reason at the forefront, and unemotionally examining different possibilities. While, of course, this is a very emotional and tragic topic, and 30 years is a long time for a case to go unsolved. I don't know if this is officially classified as a cold case. It's actually one of the longest active investigations in U.S. history. And it was jumped on immediately, day of. And they've never really let up. I mean, there's always tips coming in and developments, which is good. There's also a ton of oddities, coincidences, unexplored avenues, unexplored connections that make this one of the most bizarre cases where there seemingly is so much information, yet not enough to definitively solve the case. Although there were rumors early on that investigators knew who did it within days. And some people believe that these rumors were based on a suspect who has since committed suicide, or a different suspect that has been ruled out, but I don't know about that. It might, other people say it related to somebody else who has remained unnamed. And then, of course, there are those who believe there are some ties to law enforcement, and that's why it's unsolved. But we'll be going over everything, once again, in typical Mindshock fashion, in one of the strangest cases, unsolved cases in history. If you want to support the podcast, help us cover even more cases, and release more ongoing episodes in cases we already cover, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. And if that still doesn't work, YouTube glitches or otherwise, you can just go to youtube.com/Mindshock to manually peruse our ever-growing catalog and see the latest podcasts as they are released. If you want to keep awareness up in this case, hit that like button, share this podcast across social media platforms, of which you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Obviously, awareness is how cases get solved, and keeping the discussion going, keeping Amy's face and case out there in the hopes that either someone remembers something or there's certain comments that could be made. I mean, there's people out there with really twisted senses of humor, but who knows? The break in the case, nobody knows what the break in the case could be. So keeping the awareness up is, of course, critical in getting some of these cold cases solved. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. All right. So before I get into the multitude of data, the minutia that's available here that contains critical details, of course, and Mindshock known for going over everything that other podcasts and documentaries either are too afraid to go over or simply don't because they think it might not be related, and all of these things, we don't know what's related, what's not related, because the case is as of yet unsolved officially. So if you haven't checked out the Lake Erie murders, the first 3 episodes were dedicated to Amy's case, and they're quite good. James Renner, of course, makes an appearance. And for people who are unaware with James Renner's work, I mean, he actually brought the Amy case a lot of attention. He did the same thing for the Maura Murray case. So he definitely deserves all the credit he gets for honestly and objectively investigating all of these cases. And his work just really, I mean, there are people that appreciate it, but he's got a lot of haters for some reason. But how can you hate on the fact that this man is bringing awareness to these cases that need to be solved, particularly cases that weren't getting this level of media attention before his involvement. Not to mention, he's got the gall and the willingness to just travel to these places and face down potential suspects. I mean, how many of these narrative steerers and trolls online hiding behind keyboards would be willing to do that? It's why did he do that? He did that because he wants this case solved. He wants to bring attention to the case. So what's really, really bizarre, I mean, this is just, if somebody wrote this as a plot for a movie, it would be deemed too unbelievable. A girl leaves her bike at the Bay Middle School, which, by the way, I asked James Renner about this. He said Amy leaving her bike at the school, either possibly to go to the shopping center, which was less than a quarter of a mile. I mean, it's a 4-minute walk or so from the school. Apparently, this was not an uncommon occurrence. So this was not the only time ever Amy left her bike at the school and walked. When I initially reviewed the case, I thought if that were the case, it would be stranger, but apparently it wasn't. Anyway, she walks, not even alone, with friends or classmates to the shopping center, which is relatively bustling. I mean, it's it's the major hangout for the middle school kids, not just due to its close proximity, but this is 1989. There's an ice cream place there. This is just a hangout spot. Guess what? It's also right across the street from the police station. In broad daylight, she is lured away by this suspect who was spotted by at minimum 3 witnesses, although a few others apparently came forward and said they might have seen him. And apparently there was also either an off-duty or on-duty police officer in that shopping center at the time this was all going down. And this is a detail that I don't believe has been made public, but this is Mindshock, so we're going over everything here. And would this seem believable? A 10-year-old girl who's, by all accounts, also a very smart, aware girl. This is not, I mean, some people say this is irrelevant. I don't think so. I don't think anything is irrelevant. This is not some airhead kid that, and you can tell that too from the video they released in her classroom where she's reading some kind of she's doing some kind of presentation. This isn't a kid with zero street smarts or intelligence, and I think that's a detail that really does not need to be overlooked. I think it needs to be considered on how this could have went down with an intelligent 10-year-old. This isn't some 6 or 7-year-old who doesn't know what's going on. This is an intelligent 10-year-old, as described by many who knew her, and I really don't think they would all be lying about that. I think they would say, oh, well, if it was a different type of kid, a kid that's just trusts anybody, doesn't think about anything, who's not, like, this is someone whose personality was not extremely subdued or airheaded, by all accounts. So, and also keep in mind, in this case, the alleged perpetrator, which my theory here, just I'll go over all the details, but just I'm going to put this right out front. There seems to be a lot of issues with the investigation. Now, the FBI were involved right away, so this isn't a case of some Keystone cops botching something, although there could be a little bit of that as well, but the FBI were there right away. And in another strange detail, as noted in the Lake Erie Murders documentary, apparently Bay Village is a hot spot for FBI agents to live in. So apparently, and quote from the documentary, from law enforcement in the documentary, this is the statement: many of the FBI agents working the case live here. So now if this was like Washington, D.C., New York City, L.A., I was not aware. I've never even heard of Bay Village until the Amy Mihaljevic case. So it's not like I don't know. I was not aware that Bay Village was just this hot spot for FBI agents to live in. But apparently, according to this documentary, according to FBI and law enforcement, they did, and a lot of them working the case. We're not talking one or two. He said many of the FBI agents also lived there. So again, I don't know if this, I don't think we can dismiss this as a Keystone Cops situation. I think we need to be aware of that. But, however, if they were only looking for one suspect, and I'm putting the McGuire theory out there right now, whether or not one or more people killed Amy, there might possibly have been more than one person involved in the setup and in the abduction, and possibly a different person dumping the body. And this is where it all gets mixed up because, and keep in mind, 1989, early 90s, it's a different type of attitude. It's a different types of investigating techniques. I mean, obviously the 101 is there, but if from the get-go there were 1 to 3 or even 4 people, maybe even more, that were involved or knew about it, if there are these predators out there, not all act alone. Some of them have other predator-like friends, unofficial clubs, if you will. And this actually was the case. There were other cases where, supposedly these crime rings of these predators were busted. Were they responsible for what happened to Amy? I don't know. But if the psychological workup was a single perpetrator, and if that was not accurate, so what if one guy had an alibi? And we'll be going through all the suspects, of which there is no shortage. And if it was more than one perpetrator, maybe 2 of them even looked similar. And we'll be going over other cases as well that were in the approximate region, within driving distance of Bay Village. And I'll be going more into specifics, but other children were killed and perpetrators were arrested and convicted on DNA evidence when witnesses who even witnessed the abduction described a relatively different individual than matched the DNA profile. So and confessed. So, that's just something to keep in mind. And of course, there's issues with the composite sketches as well. There were numerous sketches. Most of them were, the initial sketch was made from 2 witnesses, and just to clarify, one of them reported the man wearing eyeglasses, another did not, slightly different facial features and hairstyle. I mean, just slight differences. So the workup, the composite that was released initially is more of a generalized approximation of both descriptions. I don't know if it would have been effective to just release 2 different composite sketches, because if one child was just more accurate than the other, and is that a possibility, in which case they maybe should have just released 2 and said that, there were 2 witnesses with 2 different descriptions instead of making one generalized description. I don't know if that would have been more effective or not. Perhaps. And then, of course, there was a different sketch of a man who was dumping the body, and that was determined to not be related to Amy's case, although we don't know that for sure. And there's just a lot of problems, because if that man was, let's say, paid off, or was just also a member of some kind of sick, sadistic club of predators, or wannabe predators, I mean, how long were they coming up with these schemes? I mean, is this just this, the serial killer version or child predator version of Dungeons and Dragons, where these guys come up with these plans, like, let's call up people and see if we can get somebody to come get a present for their mother, and exploit the child's love for a parent to lure them away. But back to what I was saying before, with Amy being relatively intelligent, this scheme did not work on other girls. So apparently, I don't know if they have an exact date of when this call took place to Amy. It was within the week prior or within 10 days prior, but the previous summer is when numerous other girls in the area received phone calls of a man claiming to know their parents and wanting to go buy a gift for a promotion of sorts. So anyway, this is the details in this case. There's just so much information to parse, and a lot of it doesn't quite add up. But regarding the investigation, if let's say one particular guy had a good alibi, the handyman, whoever, we'll be going through all of them. If his alibi even checks out, does that mean he wasn't involved? Because again, if he knew who was, it's really tough. It's really tough. And then the other thing that throws a wrench into all of this is the phone call that Amy was either allowed to make by the abductor to her mother, where her mother said she sounded off and had, normally she would speak a lot, but she had very short answers. And that was alarming. Supposedly, she said she was going to stay after school for choir rehearsals, but I don't know. That's what was said. That's what was reported. But apparently, Amy's mother believed that she made the call from home. And Amy's brother had said that she wasn't home. So there were things that didn't add up across the board. Some people believe that Amy made the phone call prior to her encounter with the perpetrator. And there's another detail that supposedly that morning, Amy and her mother, Margaret, they either got into some kind of small fight or just they were a little curt with each other. And would that attitude have carried over when Amy's making this call? Is Amy mad at her mother? I mean, I don't know, and these are all very, very curious issues. And even the layout of the shopping center, it's unknown whether she left through the main parking lot or off a different entrance. And then also, it seems like investigators did keep a bit close to the vest. And because a lot of these witnesses at the shopping center are 10 to 11 years old, maybe they didn't necessarily they might have not known exactly what to make of conflicting reports. Because certain classmates, I believe, again, these are rumors, that she was seen making a phone call from either the grocery store there or somewhere there. And apparently there's a bowling alley, or there was as well. So there's a lot of issues with everything in the case, and then of course it should all be investigated properly without any bias. And for those new to the case, might just be thinking, well, what about the trace? Couldn't they have just been traced? So that's another issue. And it's something that bothered me a little bit too, because FBI's right there. How does the phone network work in 1989 in Bay Village? Well, apparently, if the phone call had been made outside the local area, whatever the local switchboard controlled, they would have been able to have a better trace on it, but because it was local, the only thing they could know is that it was local, that it came from within Bay Village. So, again, I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate. Maybe the FBI does have more information than they've released, but officially, none of these calls could be traced, including the ones made the previous summer. So I believe officially everyone believes the calls were made from inside Bay Village. But perhaps I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's go through the basics of the case. So just straight from the wiki, Amy Renee Mihaljevic, born December 11th, 1978, and date of death here is listed as the same day of her abduction, October 27th, 1989. I'm not 100% on how they determined that. I believe they know that, just from the autopsy, they could know that she died somewhere near the time of her abduction. I don't know how they know it was that exact same day and that it couldn't have been X amount of hours after, or even days. But anyway, was a 10-year-old American elementary school student who was kidnapped and murdered in the U.S. state of Ohio in 1989. Her murder case received national attention. The story of her unsolved kidnapping and murder was presented by John Walsh on the television show America's Most Wanted during the program's early years. To date, her killer has not been found, yet the case remains active. New information in 2007 and 2013 has increased hopes of resolving the case. Disappearance and murder on October 27, 1989. Amy Mihaljevic was kidnapped from the Bay Square shopping center in Bay Village, Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland. The abductor had contacted Mihaljevic by telephone and arranged to meet her on the pretext of buying a gift for her mother because she had recently been promoted as he told her. And I believe the exact accuracy of that is she wasn't promoted, but she went from part-time to full-time. But I guess, depending, that could be seen as a promotion. And I might as well say it now because, I mean, there's so much to go over here, but I just want to lay down the groundwork. Some people believe that the killer was known to Amy and or her parents. So I know the FBI and investigators spent a lot of time on her mother's workplace and associates there. But here's the thing. As a ploy, it seems that it's very possible that the perpetrator and or perpetrators in their plans, and it could have been a different caller too, like I said earlier, if we're not dealing with a single suspect here, because there were cases of something very similar, just buying presents for parents. I mean, as far as the East Coast and some other areas, I don't believe this is all the same guy. So it seems like this is an idea that multiple different predators could have had. And if these guys knew each other, they might have also been trying out different things and then comparing notes. I mean, who knows how these people's minds work. But if it's not a single person, I don't know if he necessarily could have known her. And this is the aspect where we have to consider Amy's intelligence. Because if he is known to her, one can't argue that that would make it that much more likely. If she knows the guy, if even perhaps he's friends with the parents and for whatever reason they didn't want to say, because they said they didn't recognize the sketch, unless of course the sketch is wrong. If the sketch is off by a lot, I don't know. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. But again, we have to consider that she may or may not have known him, keeping all of these variables in mind. But when people claim the abductor had to have known that her mother moved from part-time to full-time, that's a point I believe can be disputed on the grounds that if he's just calling up a bunch of people, counting on the fact that a 10-year-old might not know that their parent got a promotion, or when they didn't get a promotion, or just the fact that kids like to know stuff adults don't know, especially kids who love their parents and want to surprise them with a gift. I mean, the perpetrator and or perpetrators, again, we have to keep in mind here, they are relatively intelligent as well. This is not some brainless scheme. There's definitely some planning involved, as the FBI and investigators have stated, that there was definitely planning involved here. There's a certain level of intelligence, because if this was an unintelligent, dumb criminal, they would have to be very, very lucky or have the direct help of FBI agents or investigators to cover their tracks in order to not get caught. So it seems, based on the available information, that the perpetrator and or perpetrators are operating at a certain intelligence level. They're not deep down in the gutter. This isn't like just someone trying to snatch someone randomly. This is someone who had the confidence to lead a girl away in the middle of a crowded shopping center across the street from the police station. And in another twist of fate, the guy who became the police chief actually spoke. Again, this is why this case is so bizarre. I mean, again, I'm not a coincidence theorist, but when there's this many oddities, one has to wonder if there's something gigantic missing in this case. A gigantic variable, an unknown variable that would make sense of all of this. But apparently, Mark Spatzel, who was investigator of the case, he actually spoke not only at Bay Village Middle School, but he spoke to Amy's class, and Amy was in his class. What was the subject of his speech? Stranger danger. So here's the thing. Again, going back to Amy's intelligence, or at least even if we say she's of average intelligence, although again, all of these reports and from her personality type, it does seem like she was clearly above average. But even if she was average, a mere couple hours, the day she's set up to meet this guy to get a gift for her mother, that same day there's a police officer in her classroom talking about strangers and safety. That makes it that much more unlikely that this was someone not known to her. Because if it's someone known to her and her parents, I mean, what is she thinking there? Well, yeah, obviously I wouldn't go off with a stranger. That's dangerous. Or is she that much of a rebel that this is some kind of, I don't know, she's thinking, oh, well, I can do it. I'm smarter than everybody. I don't know. Like, to me, there's a missing piece here. But not only that, but I don't know the exact hour Spatzel spoke to the class, but was Spatzel in the police station overlooking the shopping center outside of the window at the moment of her abduction? And how must he feel about it? Because not only does he deliver this safety speech about strangers, is he mere dozens of feet away when she is abducted and then later killed, technically on his watch, literally on his watch, where he also literally spoke in front of her, theoretically giving information that might have prevented this. And I mean, there's plenty more twists of fate here, including, of course, her brother, who was on his. He doesn't go to the shopping center every day, even though it's a major hangout, of course. But he actually had a coupon to get ice cream, and he chose. I think he was 2 years ahead of Amy, and he got out about an hour after she did. However, and she waited at the shopping center for this guy, so he didn't show up right away. He probably feels a certain amount of guilt, or at least questions himself, because there were bullies in his path or boys that gave him a hard time, and when he was going to the shopping center, so he chose to go the opposite way, which is where their house is. So he chose not to go redeem his coupon that day. And another factor, of course, this is a Friday, October 27th, it's a Friday. So who would have the whole weekend to be free? Obviously, teachers. Although, of course, anybody could, but of course, if this is happening early in the afternoon, anyone who didn't leave work early, of course, a teacher's timeline might line up more. I mean, these are all just different factors, things that need to be kept in mind. But let's go back to the wiki here. The abductor had contacted Mihaljevic by telephone, arranged to meet her on the pretext of buying a gift for her mother because she had recently been promoted, as he told her. And another thing, just real quick, I don't know if they know the exact day that he called Amy, because it's not explicitly stated anywhere. So they might not know exactly, but apparently she had told a classmate, or possibly multiple ones, of this secret. And going back to what I said before with this ploy of these perpetrators, kids like to know a secret. I mean, try telling a kid you want to hear a secret, automatically their eyes light up. They like knowing stuff adults don't know, or being able to surprise people. Whereas you ask adults, you want to know a secret? I mean, they're like, yeah, I don't know, maybe. So there's definitely some intelligence on the level of the perpetrators as well, in kind of trying to trick these kids. But keep in mind, these other children, also possibly of average intelligence, maybe below average, who this did not work on. So these are things to keep in mind. I don't think they should just be thrown by the wayside and not considered. And then, of course, we have to consider unknown unknowns, of which I think there's a big one here. I don't know what it is, but just because of the sheer amount of oddities and twists of fate, I mean, it's bizarre. It's just downright bizarre, and we're just getting started. On February 8th, 1990, the girl's body was found in a field close to the road off County Road 1181, Ruggles Township in rural Ashland County, Ohio. Evidence found at the scene of the crime suggests that Mihaljevic's body was probably dumped there shortly after her abduction. Based on findings by the Cuyahoga County coroner, Mihaljevic's last meal was some sort of soy substance, possibly an artificial chicken product or Chinese food. Other evidence includes the presence of yellow gold-colored fibers on her body. It appears her killer also took several souvenirs, including the girl's horse riding boots, her denim backpack, a binder with Buick Best in Class written on the front clasp, and turquoise earrings in the shape of horse heads. And just a quick point here, again, if they're not looking for one perpetrator, let's say there's 3 or 4, it's possible that if they were looking to assault her, maybe some of them took these as souvenirs, possibly not the killer, or of course it was mixed amongst more of them, and perhaps more than one person was involved in not only the assault but the death as well. Blood believed to be that of Mihaljevic was found in her underwear, indicating that she may have been raped or sexually abused. Blood believed to be. This is what the wiki states. So does that mean it's uncertain whether it was her blood or not? Mitochondrial DNA from the crime scene was sampled, which may be used in the future to compare suspects, and later on we'll go to the blood evidence, which actually suggests that there were 3 different profiles other than Amy's on it. Which means, again, perhaps there were 3 perpetrators. Perhaps they also enlisted another friend who maybe wasn't directly involved, but knew about it. Perhaps these are individuals that have been ruled out because they had alibis to the day of the abduction. But what does that mean if they weren't involved in the abduction, but they were involved in the assault in the day after? Or perhaps not even that, but they were enlisted to dispose of the body. Or perhaps they weren't involved directly in any fashion. They just wanted to be used to keep tabs on the investigation. And we'll be going over individuals who inserted themselves in the investigation and even were close with the mother of Amy during all of this. Investigation. The Bay Village Police and the FBI conducted an extensive investigation into her disappearance and murder. The case generated thousands of leads. Dozens of suspects were asked to take lie detector tests, but no one has ever been charged with the crime. Law enforcement continues to pursue leads and monitor suspects to the present day. 20,000 interviews have taken place during the investigation. This was described to be the biggest search in Ohio since the 1951 disappearance of Beverly Potts. And I mean, that's another case that definitely needs more in-depth investigation. If there's enough interest, perhaps I can add that to the list as well. In November 2006, it was revealed that several other young girls had received phone calls. See, this is really messed up because they didn't release this information until 2006. So this is a 1989 disappearance. They should have. One has to wonder if they released a ton, all they had right off the bat. If there were other perpetrators, or at least someone known to the perpetrators, maybe they bragged, maybe nothing even directly to do with Amy, but maybe they knew about the phone calls or people screwing around in that capacity. They could have offered tips, or maybe they did, and the tips are unreleased, but it appears here that this wasn't revealed until November 2006. That other girls received phone calls similar to the ones Mihaljevic received in the weeks prior to her abduction. The unknown male caller claimed that he worked with the girl's mother and wanted to help buying a present to celebrate her promotion. The girls who received these calls lived in North Olmsted, a suburb near Bay Village. Some had unlisted phone numbers. And we'll be getting into all of that as well. This new information was considered significant by investigators. Mihaljevic and others who received such calls had all visited the local Lake Erie Nature and Science Center, which had a visitor's logbook by the front door. The girls may have signed the book and added personal information, including phone numbers and addresses. And then, of course, this logbook was conspicuously missing by the time investigators went to go get it. Again, is that a coincidence? I don't know. I mean, it's just again the stack. It's quite high, and like I said, we're really just getting started here. Bay Village police collected DNA samples from several potential suspects in the case in December 2006. As of 2007, it was reported that a longtime suspect in the case had retained legal counsel. In late 2013, investigator Phil Torsney returned from retirement to work on the case, which he was originally assigned to after the murder. Torsney is well known for aiding in the capture of Whitey Bulger, who was a longtime member of the FBI Top 10 Most Wanted. Torsney stated that he believed that Mihaljevic was transported out of Bay Village after she was kidnapped, as the town is, quote, too dense, too close-knit to be a likely place to commit murder, end quote. However, he stated that the murder likely took place in Ashland County, which the murderer was probably familiar with. And we'll be getting into that as well, because again, if there was more than one person involved, and one person did live, let's say, very close to Amy or the shopping center, and another perpetrated close to where the body was found, does that cover all the avenues? Because again, we're missing some information here. The FBI announced in March 2014 that a $25,000 reward is available to anyone who can provide information that leads to the arrest and conviction of the killer. In October, it was increased to $27,000. In 2016, it was discovered that a blanket and curtain located near Mihaljevic's body had hairs on them similar to Mihaljevic's dog. They were possibly used to conceal the victim's body before she was left in the field. And that's another thing that's strange, because so the curtain blanket material was found over 1,000 feet away from her body. So the other detail that's never I don't know if it's been mentioned in documentaries or podcasts, but apparently coyotes got to her body, so it was chewed up. I don't know if that's accurate or not. That's information that's been put out online, and that could explain the distance between the body and the curtain blanket, because it would seem a little bit strange to separate, if the person that was leaving her body there would separate them intentionally and then drive over 1,000 feet. I think it was 1,043 feet. Just a little bizarre. In 2018, investigators were also following a potential link between Joseph Newton Chandler III and the murder of Mihaljevic. And this is, of course, the guy that was an identity thief who committed suicide in Eastlake, Ohio, July 2002. And I'll be getting into him later as well. In 2019, authorities stated that they have extensively investigated all suspects in the case and feel that if her killer were identified, he would likely be a part of their list. Aftermath. In response to her daughter's death, Mihaljevic's mother, Margaret McNulty, co-founded a foundation to protect children from such situations that happened to Amy. However, McNulty had suffered from lupus after the death of Amy, resulting in her death at age 54 in 2001. Mihaljevic's case was also discussed on The Oprah Winfrey Show and during a 3-part television documentary special titled The Lake Erie Murders: What Happened to Amy Mihaljevic. And that is, it's a good documentary. It's actually hard to watch. It's really hard to watch, of course. I had to watch it in several parts, particularly the parts with Margaret, her mother. It's so heart-wrenching to watch what this did to her. Not just her, but of course everybody, her brother, and all of these things. It's really, really tough. So, from the unsolvedmysteries.fandom.com wiki entry here, in 1989, 10-year-old Amy Mihaljevic received a call from a man named Frank, who claimed to be her mother's co-worker and that she was getting a promotion and wanted to meet with her in order to pick out something for her mother for a surprise party for the promotion. Now, I'm not sure where they originally got the name Frank, or where this was originally reported. So I'm actually guessing. I actually don't know where this was first reported. I'm guessing that her classmate who she told about this phone call mentioned Frank, but this is what the Unsolved Mysteries site states. On October 27th, 1989, she went to the local mall to meet him and vanished. She was last seen there by some of her schoolmates talking to him, who is believed to be her abductor. When her mother, Margaret, learned that she had not come home, she called the police. Authorities investigated the case and were almost certain that she had been abducted, but had no suspects. The town of Bay Village was shocked by her abduction, and hundreds of people began helping to find her. Then, on February 8th, 1990, a jogger found the body of a young girl about 50 miles from Bay Village that was soon identified as hers. She had been stabbed to death and had been dead for a long amount of time. Her killer has never been caught. Suspects: the composite sketch was made by eyewitnesses of the man seen with Amy the day she vanished. Some of them claimed that he had glasses, but others couldn't remember. They described him as Caucasian, 5'8 to 5'10, medium build, black hair, and would be in his 50s today. Authorities believe that he had a sudden behavioral change after her abduction, may have had a drinking or gambling problem, or a sudden interest in religion. Extra notes: the original air date of this case is unrevealed. It was also featured on America's Most Wanted and Missing Reward. Results unsolved. Several people, including Robert Holbert, have confessed to killing Amy, but no one has ever been charged in her death. Another man named Dean Runkle is considered a suspect in the case, as he matches the description of the man seen with her, but he maintains his innocence. Sadly, in October 2001, Margaret passed away because of chronic alcoholism from drinking since Amy's murder. Her family claims that the person who killed her indirectly killed Margaret as well. In 2006, detectives announced that several other girls in the area received calls from a person who claimed to work with their mother and wanted to meet with them to get a present for her that they believe are connected to Amy's case. Although it remains unsolved, there are several suspects and new leads are still coming in. So one of the most definitive articles here on the case is called The Coldest Case. 16 years after Amy Mihaljevic vanished, the hunt for her killer presses on, written by none other than James Renner, and this is from Scene, clevescene.com. This was published July 20th, 2005. Before there was Natalie Holloway, Shasta Groen, or Shakira Johnson, there was the little girl with the ponytail. It's the ponytail, braided on the left, that most people remember first. Just a side saddle swish dangling above the half-closed eyes of a 10-year-old girl smiling for her class photo. Amy Mihaljevic always hated that picture. But the image was burned into Northeast Ohio's consciousness after she was abducted in October 1989. For 3 months, it hung from telephone poles, flashed on daily newscasts, and peered out from the front pages of suburban newspapers. And just another quick side point here, too, as was revealed on the Lake Erie murders, I believe a friend of the family or someone rushed to the news station so that they could put Amy's picture up that she was missing. I mean, this is the day of her disappearance, within hours of her disappearance. And the news station, of course, said, she hasn't been missing 24 hours, if she's at a friend's house, whatever. We can't just put that on the news broadcast. But somehow they ended up putting it on the broadcast. And so here we have an immediate response. I mean, there's not much of a delay here, which is the other odd thing about the case. In these other cases, I mean, there's hours and hours, if not a full day, that go by before a response. And some of those cases actually ended up being solved. But anyway, just as a point here, it seems like everything that could be done was done. I mean, there were searches immediately. And they had the news broadcast her picture that same day. So it's interesting that even with all of this, not much was done unless it was. And it wasn't revealed by investigators, which I will be going over, including reports on some kind of commotion in a house near where she was found. And again, there's a house that burned down. There were other houses that collapsed, but there were witnesses who actually saw FBI taking drywall out of houses and putting them on helicopters. And this was near where her body was found. So it's very possible that because of this immediate response, they had at least. So that's the other thing I'm thinking. If they had one of the guys, maybe they wanted all of them. Is that why they were unable to act? Maybe they let him go and they wanted to see who he would go talk to. Maybe they knew who the guy was the whole time, and maybe they were following him, and then maybe when it didn't work out, they wrote him off and thought he wasn't involved even when he was. And that's where some of these rumors come from that they had the guy early on. I don't know. But anyway, back to James Renner's article here. 16 years later, Amy's spirit still haunts the upper middle class suburban bubble that is Bay Village. That snapshot remains chiseled into its fabric. It's on a rose garden memorial under a magnolia tree at the police station, on a slab of wood inside the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center, and on a plaque collecting dust in the library of the new middle school. In Bay, where dilemmas usually consist of whether to take chips or dessert to the block party, unsolved murders are taken personally. Locals still cringe about the 1954 slaying of Dr. Sam Shepard's wife, the case that inspired The Fugitive, and the search for the one-armed man. Shepard spent 10 years in jail before the Supreme Court overturned the conviction, and his son still fights to clear his name. But did the doctor get away with murder, or did the window washer do it? Everyone in town has an opinion, even today. Likewise, many have their own theory about who stole Amy, although no one has ever been charged. The 60 FBI agents once assigned to the case have dwindled down to one. At the police department, Detective Mark Spatzel has become the reluctant curator of 14,000 interviews, 8,000 leads, 4 file cabinets stuffed with reports, 2 shelves of bound photographs, and a locked cabinet containing evidence. It's all kept in a broom closet, a sort of makeshift mausoleum. Spatzel was a kid cop in 1989 with 4 years in the department. Today he is a well-worn family man, his hair graying at the temples. Amy smiles down at him each day from the missing child poster that hangs above his desk. The fleet of volunteers and the phalanx of investigators have long since retreated in frustration. But Spatzel hasn't given up. The 2 or 3 new leads that come in each week motivate him. I think about it like it was yesterday, he says. The next tip that comes in could be the one. Until then, he whittles away at a shrinking list of suspects. Keeping Amy alive is his job. Mark Mihaljevic met Margaret in high school in the tiny Wisconsin burg of West Allis. Wanderlust led the newlyweds to Little Rock, Arkansas, where Mark got a job with Buick. He was a field rep handling complaints and warranties. It was his job once a year to ship the biggest watermelon in the state to the corporate headquarters in Flint. The couple started their family in Little Rock, first with a boy named Jason, then in '78 with Amy Renee. Mark was transferred briefly to Mississippi, then to Cleveland in 1989. They bought a 4-bedroom colonial on Linford Road in Bay Village. It seemed like the safest place around. Before long, the Mihaljevics grew comfortable in their new routine. Margaret would shuttle Jason and Amy to friends' houses or the park during the day. Then Mark would come home and take them to the pool to cool off at night. Picked on by other kids because of his weight, Jason spent most of his time building model cars in the basement and helping neighborhood adults with small chores. Amy, however, had no trouble making friends. To neighbors, she was a little bundle of kinetic energy, zigzagging her banana seat bicycle down the sidewalk, waving at everyone. When Margaret visited friends, Amy trailed behind like a miniature shadow and always joined in the conversation. 9 doors down lived Kristen Bayless, who was a grade ahead of Amy. Some days they would flatten pennies on the railroad tracks behind Linford. Mostly they would stay inside and watch reruns of The Monkees on Nickelodeon. Amy knew it was time to go home when the streetlights came on. She also befriended a classmate named Kristen Sabo, who lived a few streets away. During the summer of '89, Amy was at the Sabos' house practically every day. Kristen's mother, Jeannie, came to think of Amy as her adopted daughter. Amy spent a lot of time at my house because I didn't want her to be alone, remembers Jeannie. Margaret Mihaljevic had an escalating drinking problem and would drop Amy off late at night for impromptu sleepovers, Jeannie recalls. Most days, Amy looked slightly disheveled. She preferred sweats to jeans, and when she talked or smiled, she tilted her head so she could look out from her unbrushed hair. Jeannie lovingly nicknamed her Ragamuffin. They didn't have a lot of money, she says of the Mihaljevics. Every time I saw her, I just wanted to make her up. She was a beautiful kid. Sleepovers at the Sabo house were mainly spent with the two girls sharing a living room chair, memorizing lines from Dirty Dancing or 16 Candles. When Amy grew tired, she would lie down and rock herself to sleep. Do you mind if I rock on? She would ask me, recalls Kristen. I would just say, rock on, Amy, rock on. Amy and Kristen also formed a babysitters club that summer. They passed out flyers around Bay Village advertising their services. Both Amy's and Kristen's home numbers were printed on the front. And I just want to do a quick aside right there as well, because here's another issue. If the Nature Center, which Amy had attended, as well as other girls who supposedly had unlisted numbers that were called in that previous summer by allegedly possibly the same perpetrator or perpetrators, if it wasn't them and if the Nature Center is not a connection, we have another problem here because her number was already on posters over town. So the Nature Center is not a definitive 100% link there. Although, if there's more than one perpetrator and one of them did work at the Nature Center, one of them didn't, the one that didn't, if that was the one that called Amy, I mean, again, we don't know here. We don't know. I just think there's more than meets the eye here. There are some unknowns that need to be filled because, and of course, known unknowns like this, do we know if there's more than one perpetrator? We know that it's a possibility. We could examine that. But there are also unknown unknowns, things that we don't even know to question. The pair began to grow apart when Kristen joined a soccer team and Amy took up riding horses at Holly Hill Farms, which sat just across the border from Bay in Avon Lake. And of course, there was another suspect there, and there is a Holly Hills Farms connection because one of the other girls that received a phone call also went there, but I'll be getting into that later. Amy, like the other girls, wore a black blazer, cap, and boots whenever she rode Razzle through the farm's obstacle course. For 2 years prior to 1989, she visited Holly Hill once a week for lessons. By October, she was spending almost every day at the stables. Right at the end, she would take her bike out there, Mark says, shaking his head. She was unsupervised. So apparently she was unsupervised and she went to the stables almost every day by October. Unsupervised. So that's another thing too. Theoretically, she could have been grabbed on the way there, right? Was someone watching her? Is it really easier to grab her at a crowded shopping center? I mean, again, there are some things that don't make sense here. Friday, October 27th was picture retake day at Bay Middle School. Amy hated the ponytail in the photo taken at the start of the year. She was a 5th grader now, and she wanted to wear her hair down. Indian summer had settled in that week, so many students made the half-mile trek to Baskin-Robbins that afternoon. Amy had told her parents she was staying after school for choir tryouts, but she was really meeting someone, according to schoolmate Kristen Bayless. Amy had told Bayless that a man had called her at home after school earlier in the week. So if this is accurate, that means he had called, what would that be? That would either have been through the Monday through Thursday, so possibly not the Monday. I mean, you're going to make plans that far ahead for Friday? I don't know. So possibly Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. He had said that he worked with Amy's mother and that she had just gotten a promotion. He suggested they get her a present, and he told her not to spoil the surprise by telling anyone. You know the thing that's weird, though? On her phone bill, even if it wouldn't have said the number, or local call at least, did they not know? Were all local numbers not even listed on the bill in 1989? He suggested they get her a present, and he told her not to spoil the surprise by telling anyone. But here's the thing, too. Amy already defied him because she told at least one person, if not more, about this. So Bayless and possibly someone else. According to Bayless, Amy was instructed to meet him in the parking lot next to Baskin-Robbins on Friday. Amy knew her mother had started a part-time job recently with the Tradin Times, the barter magazine in Rocky River, but she didn't know everyone who worked there. And lately, she and her mom had been fighting. Amy told Bayless she had overheard her parents talking about divorce. So apparently it wasn't just that morning. Amy agreed to meet the man. She told friends not to tell anyone. She told friends not to tell anyone. So that's more than one person that she told. Wearing a lavender shirt with green sweatpants and ankle-high black boots, Amy left her bicycle in the racket school and made her way to the ice cream shop. When the junior high let out an hour later, her brother also started in that direction until he noticed a group of boys ahead. They were bullies, older boys who picked on him. So he changed direction and went home instead. When he arrived and Amy wasn't there, he called his mom at work. Margaret, again, this is also not a stupid kid, because instead of waiting around, I mean, I'm sure he waited X amount of minutes and she's not there. He didn't just absentmindedly watch TV or assume she had went to a friend's house and didn't tell anybody, even though that would be a perfectly logical assumption, would it not? But he called his mother. Margaret told him that Amy had gone to a choir function and should be back soon. She asked Jason to have her call when she got in. At 3:30, Jason called his mom again. Amy's still not home, he said. Alarmed, Margaret prepared to leave the office. Then Amy called. Margaret asked Amy about choir. She would later recall. Choir meets on Wednesday and Thursday, Amy answered. Wait a minute, this is Friday. Why were you there? Amy grew quiet. Is this some kind of audition or something? Margaret asked. Yeah, it was for the new people. So again, I'm not sure how accurate this recollection is. This is James Renner writing about it many years later. I'm assuming if he interviewed police or whoever in their notes, this is what it said, or this was to the best of the recollection of Margaret. Margaret assumed that Amy was calling from home. They spoke for a moment longer before hanging up. Still, something didn't feel right. Amy, normally talkative, had kept her answers short. Margaret finished packing for the weekend and went home early anyway. So she felt something was wrong, although with the knowledge that her parents are getting a divorce and that she's fighting with her daughter, that's another added layer to consider. Because kids who are mad at their parents, they might not have a regular conversation like this. So it's just, there's a lot here to keep in mind simultaneously before saying something is strange or not strange. Also, of course, unknown if the perpetrator was standing right next to her or not. Did she make that call earlier? Or James Renner hypothesized that as they were in the vehicle, Amy wanted to call her mother, or perhaps it's very unusual, again, just statistically, for an abductor to allow his victim to call someone because they can scream for help, they can describe him, they can name him if they know who this is. It's just there's just things that make this case so unlike any other, and there's definitive known information here. It's not like she made a call, we don't know who she talked to. I mean, there's known information here, and the case is still unsolved. So Margaret finished packing for the weekend, went home early anyway. When she stepped across the threshold of her house, she was greeted only by Jason. Mom, she's still not home. It was 4:30. So again, there's no waiting. Margaret drove to the school to find Amy's bike still leaning from the rack. Then she bolted to the police station. I believe in her interview or on one of these documentaries, she had stated she tried to get into the school, but she couldn't get into the school. Then she went to the police station. But either way, continuing with the article here, though Amy had been missing for only a couple of hours, her disappearance was immediately treated as an abduction. Her description called into cruisers and passed along to surrounding communities. So again, we have just a really, really immediate, solid response here. Unlike all these other cases, I mean, the Delphi case comes to mind, where law enforcement is just brushing this off as, oh, she's probably at a friend's house. We don't see that here. By the time Mark Mihaljevic came home from work, Margaret was hysterical. Between convulsions of sobs, she called all of Amy's friends trying to figure out who had seen her last. Jeannie Sabo mobilized the PTA. Names of all the fifth graders were divided among the board members, who called each child to see whether anyone knew where she was. No one did. Desperation grew palpable as the sun retreated over the treetops. Mark frantically searched Amy's favorite haunts. He checked back at school, then at Huntington Park. He and a friend followed a small creek behind the school to where it drained into Lake Erie, shouting her name into the darkening autumn sky. Sabo drove Amy's class picture downtown to Channel 3. She pulled back into Mihajlovic's driveway just in time to hear Margaret's primal scream. Amy's picture had just come up on TV. The FBI was alerted 14 hours after Amy disappeared, and a command post was set up inside the Bay Village Police Department. Special Agent Dick Wren, who lived a few streets away from Lindford Road, led the investigation. Among the first people he spoke to was Kristen Bayless, who told him about Amy's plans to meet a man who she had spoken to on the phone. To Wren, it sounded like the clue that would solve the mystery, but the man's call had been placed from a local number. Only long-distance calls were logged by the phone company at the time. So that means there was no log of the phone at all? I mean, that's a little bizarre. See, this is 1989, not 1940, but even in 1940, isn't there some kind of information? It just seems strange. If there are any telephone experts or people who worked at telephone companies or switchboards in the late 80s, if they could chime in, it would be nice to know what the situation is here. Another classmate had seen Amy leaning against a post in the parking lot of Baskin-Robbins, talking to a white man with large round glasses and dark hair with a bald spot near the back of his head. A composite sketch was created. From that moment on, the black and white rendering accompanied Amy's photo everywhere. And also, I don't know if this has been discussed, is it possible that this man, even though he talked to her, maybe they walked together, he might have simply handed her off to somebody, right? Because let's say somebody offered to pay this guy, like, here's $100, go tell this girl this, lead her to my car. Now, it seems kind of weird to do this. It seems more likely that if this is more than one perpetrator, they all knew each other well and trusted each other, and maybe that's why they haven't talked yet. Or maybe they have talked and police or FBI have not released this information, I don't know. But either way, is it possible that this person that was spotted is not who harmed her for whatever reason? I mean, we all know there's a lot of weird people and creepos in that area. I mean, the suspect list is not short for this case. So, I mean, theoretically, is it a possibility that this is a red herring? And whether or not the sketch looks like the man, maybe that man is not responsible. I don't know. I don't know. Is it possible the man wanted to abduct her but not kill her? And then there was a certain element that he was either associated with, or perhaps he was staying somewhere where they saw him and the girl, and then they kind of ran him off and then killed the girl. So maybe he is the abductor, but he's not the murderer. I mean, there's just so many things we don't know. There's so many unknown variables here. And the accuracy of the sketches, again, we really don't know. Over the first weekend, dozens of volunteers set up their own headquarters in the basement of the police station. There, they ran off endless copies of Amy's picture and the composite sketch and prepared food for the investigators working upstairs. By Saturday afternoon, FBI agents with search dogs began to canvass the area around Holly Hill Farms. Over several days, planes with heat-sensing equipment swept over the woods and fields that surrounded the stables. I actually didn't know that detail. They had heat sensing equipment. So they had heat vision in 1989 and they used it. Interesting. Yet they can't trace phone calls. Wren turned his attention to Harold H.B. Bound, the son of the farm's owner. A paranoid schizophrenic and veteran of Vietnam, Bound lived in a small apartment above the garage and cleaned out stalls at the stables. A gun enthusiast, he kept a collection of firearms and other weapons in his room. Jennifer O'Brien, who rode horses with Amy, recalls seeing Bound walking through the fields behind the barn in camouflage, carrying a bow. She remembers feeling uneasy around him. All of us girls thought he was really creepy, says Shannon Conway, who also took lessons at the farm. He would wander around the barn sometimes. Every girl at the barn assumed HB did it. In questioning with Wren, Bound offered no verifiable alibi for October 27th. His brother Greg later said he saw Harold return to the farm late that night. He took multiple lie detectors but was never held. Within a week of Amy's disappearance, Bound signed himself into the mental ward at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Brecksville. He was plagued by bouts of uncontrollable violence. Here's the thing, though. I mean, what was his criminal record like? Did he ever harm anybody before? I mean, I don't know if that was revealed. Meanwhile, there were other leads. Residents of Linford Road recalled a man who had painted the house next to the Mihaljevics shortly before Amy's abduction. Actually, let me go back to Bound here. Supposedly, later on, he apparently was very disturbed by all of this. So let's say he's innocent for a moment. Let's say he doesn't have any friends and he's not friends with the real perpetrators or perpetrator. Again, we don't know how many people were involved here. In another, I mean, I don't know how often this happens in other missing persons cases. He actually at one point demanded to take a lie detector test with truth serum. With truth serum. So this, to me, that seems like this man is just sick and tired of being viewed as a suspect. He's willing to do anything to clear his name, and apparently after that interview with the truth serum, he was no longer considered a suspect. Also, interesting thing to note is whether or not, like, which exact questions were asked with the truth serum, because if they were specifically looking for only one perpetrator, and if he wasn't it, I mean, I would think they asked him questions related to his friends, if he knew any, or other shady people who may have harmed Amy. I would think they would have asked him that. I don't know if that was ever released, though. All right, moving on. Meanwhile, there were other leads. Residents of Linford Road recalled a man who had painted the house next to the Mihaljevics shortly before Amy's abduction. Kurt Van Gunten, they said, bore an uncanny resemblance to the composite sketch. He was a free spirit who lived in a shack on the other side of town. Bay Village police received numerous calls asking that he be checked out. His own ex-girlfriend was among them. But Van Gunten had an airtight alibi. He had attended the Bay Fairview football game that night with sportscaster Casey Coleman, a childhood friend. They were sitting together when the booth announcer came on, appealing to the crowd for information about Amy's whereabouts. Coleman confirmed for the FBI that Van Gunten had been with him since that afternoon. Van Gunten declined comment for the story. Here's the thing, though. Again, if we're dealing with a ring of people, possibly some, again, in 1989, this would probably be considered tinfoil hat talk. But today, we're now in 2021. Are there high-profile politicians involved in these rings that might include child abduction and child assault and all of these really shady, highly disturbing things to even think about? Is it possible? Again, Van Gunten supposedly was a really shady guy with a lot of reports against him, including just lewd behavior, and a lot of people were afraid of him. A lot of people considered him really, really shady. Now, it's unclear here whether he's friends. So he's a childhood friend with sportscaster Casey Coleman. So what does Casey Coleman know? Now, I'm not calling Casey Coleman a liar because supposedly he was not the only witness who spotted Van Gunten at this game. Supposedly there were other people that verified this. But again, if, let's say, Van Gunten probably knew Amy, because if she had walked past this house and he had seen her, if he knew her, perhaps he provided the lead to other shady individuals. And who knows what they did. Again, if we're under the assumption that this is a guy acting alone and no one has any knowledge, this might be a tough case to crack, because if there's more than one individual involved, either in a recon, bad jokes, or whatever, not even discussing the fact that it may not be the same people that abducted her, might not be the same people or person who killed her, and they might not be the same people or person who dumped her body. So there's a lot of variables here that, again, in 1989, were they operating with this kind of thinking? I don't know. I want to go back for a moment, backtrack a little bit to the phone call Amy made to her mother. Is another reason she was kind of giving super short answers. If the guy, let's say the guy was late, because she's there at the shopping center waiting for him. Maybe if she needs to buy more time, would she call her mother of her own volition quickly, just so she wouldn't be expected? And she's keeping her answers on the phone really short because she thought if the guy came and didn't see her, like if she went inside the grocery or wherever there was a payphone, she had to go back out to the spot where she had agreed to meet the guy. Would that be reason to keep a conversation short? And another point. Let's say this perpetrator, either the caller or the guy that first met her, is it possible Amy knew this guy, possibly trusted him, and he was friends with another guy who Amy did not know? And again, this is why, again, there's a variable we're missing here. Amy being a smart kid, Spatzel giving the talk in class that very day. I mean, there's just where the meeting, I mean, he's meeting her in front of a police station. I mean, come on, like in a popular hangout area. There's a missing variable here. If this guy is someone known to Amy, possibly the family, and he's friends with the true perpetrator, and they're both in operation here, what if he's waiting in the car and the guy Amy knows and trusted is the guy that leads her to the car? Or does she see the guy in the car that she knows and trusted, and this other guy is the guy that walks up to her? Because the guy in the car doesn't want to be spotted. Because if it's a popular spot, there's going to be a lot of cars in the parking lot with people in them coming and going. Could that account for everything? I mean, it's really tough. And I mean, this is really disturbing to even think about. But let's say the perpetrator is there next to her. during the phone call, whether in the grocery store or not. I believe there was a witness, I don't know how reliable, that saw her at a payphone in that shopping center. And I don't, and again, this is rumor mill, so it's unknown whether or not he saw somebody with her. Or if it's a popular place, maybe the guy with her was standing a little off to the side so it wouldn't be evident that he was the one with her. So somebody observing her making a call, if there's someone immediately next to her, they would notice. If there's someone 10 feet away, possibly standing sideways, not even looking in her direction, they wouldn't necessarily assume, they wouldn't think that person was with her, even if he was. And also keep in mind, nobody's specifically trying to catch an abductor here. This is supposedly a safe place where no one thought this could ever happen. So they're not really watching anybody that carefully. There's a lot of kids there. There's a lot of people there. There's supposedly a police officer in there at that moment as well, somewhere around. So, and there's a police station across the street. So it's easy to, in hindsight, to say, oh, how come nobody saw anything? They weren't looking for anything. So that's the thing. But if, let's say Amy didn't know the guy, even if it's only one guy, what kind of a threat would make her do whatever he said? If he claims to know her mother, her father, her brother, if he said if she didn't do exactly what he said, he would kill her and her whole family, would she freak out, or would she do exactly what he said? I don't know. Okay, here's another thing I want to go over that I don't know has been if it's been gone over extensively or at all. Let's say it was one perpetrator. Did he know the police station was right across the street? So several people that visited the area said that when you're standing by the Baskin Robbins, you wouldn't necessarily know there's a police station on the diagonal across the street. So does that mean he wasn't local? Now, I mean, again, you'd have to be pretty crazy. How often does someone get abducted across the street from the police station in broad daylight in a populated shopping center? Just a very popular hangout spot with dozens of witnesses. It's just possibly including police officers as well. It's strange. However, if you're from out of town, I mean, it's still strange to abduct someone in broad daylight with a lot of witnesses, but right across the police station. Now, I have, again, just looking at all of this, if everything went down the way that's been reported, I think the case would have already been solved. So, unless there's some kind of weird FBI element connection that we don't know about, and FBI or local law enforcement investigators are covering for people for some reason. Let's remove that from the possibilities just for the moment. If this did not go down as it's believed to have gone down, what are the options? Is this more than one perpetrator? One guy's local, one guy's not local. Now, what if there's another variable here? What if they don't even like each other? How would this go down? So the guy that's local, people know him. He doesn't want to be identified. If he's in the car, possibly even wearing a disguise, would he have the not local guy go try to get Amy to go with them? And does the not local guy, would someone not local, would they knowingly do that in front of a police station? So if the local guy didn't even tell the not local guy that there was a police station there, does that make this scenario more likely? And James Renner and others believe that Amy did not go to the main parking lot, that whoever this was parked off to the side or in the back somewhere. So, and they think that he really would have been seen if he was in the main parking lot. Again, unless it was maybe a local guy, maybe wearing a disguise, and we'll get into the vehicles in the area as well later. But it seems too unlikely. I mean, what kind of a perfect storm is this, that this guy gets away with this in a busy shopping center across the street from the police station, and nobody sees anything? I don't know. It really seems like something's missing here. And I don't know if this is discussed either, but it seems like he must have specifically told Amy not to bring her bike to the shopping center, even though she could have left her bike at the shopping center, right? Because if they're going shopping to the mall or somewhere else and she has to get in his car, and he told, like, she wouldn't be able to take the bike. It seems like this was planned out well enough that he wanted the bike left at the school so people would initially think she was abducted from the school or possibly went home in a friend's car just to buy him more time. I'm not sure about that, obviously. I don't know what investigators think about that particular point, but it seems like a possibility that he planned this thing out. And if he knew she rode a bike, because she did ride a bike around the neighborhood fairly frequently, if this was more than one perpetrator, one of them was fairly familiar with her schedule and even what kind of type of bike she had. That's all very possible. Let's go a little farther out of the box for a moment as well. Apparently, nobody saw Amy entering a vehicle. So, one of the witnesses believed it was her father, or both. So, they kind of didn't really think anything of it as he was leading her away. What if, let's say Amy got cold feet and she realized something was up and she didn't get in the car? Now, we don't know what time any of this went down, so if the phone call was before this encounter, if it was later than people believe that she was taken, is it possible she wasn't taken directly at the shopping center? So if she was walking, I don't know. We really have to consider the possibility that this did not go down as reported, as people think right now. And that's something to be considered as well. What if, and again, if this other individual or individuals, the perpetrators, if they didn't know there was a police station right there, but there would have been a heavy police presence, either vehicles in the parking lot of the police station or nearby, maybe if they were thinking on the fly, if this is an out-of-towner, I mean, it's hard to believe that someone local wouldn't know that there's a police station there. So either they knew and planned for it, or it's someone not local possibly working with someone local. Possibly it's more than one person not local. Did they change up their plan on the fly? And she was taken up as she was walking away from the shopping center. What if she felt like she was stood up by this guy? What would the plan be after that? Would she walk back to the school to just get her bike and go home? And did they take her on her walk back to the school? We really don't know any of this information. I mean, I'm not saying any of this is likely. I'm just exploring other possibilities because if she wasn't seen actually entering a vehicle, what happened? I did find a comment on a blog of someone who lived in the area at the time, and they said that people did ride bikes to the shopping center, but there weren't a lot of places to put there. So there might have been a small bike rack by Roger and Ray's, but the school bike rack was the safest bike rack. So that's allegedly from someone who lived in the area. And another interesting thing, too, from the 10-year report on the case, it states the description provided by witnesses was based on fleeting glimpses of a man seen approaching Amy, but not in actual contact with her. So that makes it quite interesting because if this guy really was there, if he walked in Amy's direction, and maybe he even said hi, hello as he walked past her, did she not walk with him back to a vehicle? Because again, we have to keep in mind, these are statements from 10 or 11-year-olds that didn't know, they weren't watching for anything. So asked in hindsight, did they feel pressure from FBI or investigators to say, oh yeah, the guy talked to her and he led her away, but we didn't see the car or anything because we thought he was her dad? How much of that was them just really trying to desperately be helpful because they could see the effect this was having on the community? And maybe they really did believe that was the guy, but that doesn't mean it was actually the guy. Is it possible it's been a red herring this whole time? Not that he wasn't there, not that a guy that looked like him wasn't there. And were these witnesses really even describing the same guy? Because if there's that many people in the shopping center, several different people could have been walking in her direction, even close enough to say hi as they walked by. Who knows? I mean, this is a kid twirling around a pole, friendly looking kid. In 1989, in a nice, peaceful community, would you say hi, hello, as you walked by that kid? Or having fun there, or something of the sort. I mean, this is 1989 in a peaceful in a peaceful town that hasn't been touched by these tragedies. I don't know. I think that's all. We have to keep all that in mind, and I think there's definitely something missing with the official story. I mean, the source of the "Hey Amy" that he knew her name in the parking lot. I mean, that would have to be nailed down as well. I believe James Renner said one of the witnesses, the male witness at the shopping center, was hypnotized, and I don't know if that was for the first sketch. The witness who saw someone the night before the body was found on the road where the body was found, she was hypnotized and they came up with a sketch as well. I don't know if the hypnosis was for the original sketch or after the fact. And again, even if the witness was being truthful, again, there's no real reason for the 10 or 11-year-old to lie, I don't think. And they might have really saw the person approach Amy. Did they really hear him say, "Hey, Amy"? So apparently so depending on which articles you read, 2 female witnesses saw Amy talking to a man. Apparently there was another male witness who saw Amy there also. So what does talking to a man mean? So I haven't found anything that said that there were witnesses that specifically saw the man lead her to a vehicle. So they saw her talking to a man. Is it possible she was talking to a man she did know, friend, family, relative, who had nothing to do with her abduction, and then the man walked away, and then the real perpetrator was unnoticed? It's so difficult with all these logistics. I mean, they should have really hypnotized every single individual that was there that day to piece it together. And maybe they did. I mean, I don't know. They seem to have kept a lot of details non-public, including the police officer who was in the plaza, either on or off duty. I believe the rumor was there was a police officer hassling a kid or a couple of kids at the approximate time when Amy was there. It'd be interesting if he was hypnotized as well. The other thing, if it was the guy that she was seen talking to, what could he have said? Because here's the thing. If he knows that, I mean, the area is crowded. If he is of a certain intelligence level, could he have told her, "Oh, hey, look, I got to do 1 or 2 more things, but I parked here. Oh, maybe not in the main lot. I parked out back. Just give me 5 minutes and then I'll meet you there." And then he walks away without her. And then she walks alone there. I mean, I don't know. Again, we really don't know how all this went down, but I'm thinking it might have went down a lot different than what investigators have been either working with or surmising, at least publicly. Perhaps they know a lot more. And this is Mindshock, so let's really go out there with the possibilities. Let's say she was stood up. What if this guy didn't have the nerve to follow through? Maybe he mentioned it to someone else. Maybe he didn't. Maybe Amy started or was planning to head back. Or maybe if the guy she was seen talking to, if that's true, he told her to meet him somewhere else because he had to do an errand. Maybe it was a block over somewhere else. Maybe there's another point we're missing here. Either or, if he stood her up, or someone stood her up, now she might be a little frustrated, a little sad. I mean, the walk to the school is not that far, but perhaps another individual not connected to the phone call or any of this decides to take advantage. Maybe it's someone she really did know. That shopping center is a popular place. People take their kids there for ice cream. Maybe someone was making an ice cream run, whatever. Someone's father And this individual said, "Oh, what are you doing here? You're alone? Oh, let me give you a ride home." And she might have told him, "Oh, my bike's at the school. I'll give you a ride to the school." She goes with him. She's never seen again. Maybe this has absolutely nothing to do with the phone call. Maybe this has absolutely nothing to do with the guy she was seen talking to. Again, I'm not saying any of this is likely. I'm saying without knowing the exact circumstances, are we operating with too many assumptions when we assume the currently reported official story is true? And of course, when we're assuming, so the official story, people would have seen any kind of physical struggle, of course. Now, depending on exactly where Amy was standing, and if there was no one within, let's say, 4 to 5 feet of her, could this individual have positioned himself in such a way where possibly, if he had a gun in his waistband, he could have possibly showed it to Amy without anybody else seeing if they were facing a wall or something of that nature? And would that have been enough to scare her to not freak out and cause a scene? I mean, I don't know. He's talking to a 10-year-old here, but if he said, "If you scream, I'm going to shoot at you and everybody here," I mean, I don't know. I mean, we have to, again, this could be a completely insane individual again. I mean, I don't know how sane someone would be to do this in the first place, let alone across the street from a police station. But if they're that bold, I mean, there's a fine line with this level of bold and complete insanity. Would someone have come up with such a scheme? He showed her a gun, or maybe even I don't know, a gun, and he said he would kill everybody if she didn't go with him willingly. I mean, I don't know. This could have played out completely differently than has been surmised thus far. And there's another situation too, which I don't know if it's been discussed. Yeah, she was seen talking to a man. Possibly a man was seen approaching her. Is it possible she struck a conversation up with a man as well? Now, let's say there was someone who didn't know about the whole meeting. Someone who, again, a sketchy individual, if a 10-year-old walked up to him and said, "Are you the man I'm supposed to meet?" He doesn't know anything about anything. But if he's some kind of a predator, would he say, "Oh, yeah, my car's right here, let's go"? I mean, there's a certain percentage of the population who's probably sadistic enough to do something if they thought they could get away with it and the situation presented itself. Is that what happened here? Is this predator perhaps not related to the predator that called her? I mean, I don't know. Again, if everything was this simple, the case would be solved. So clearly there's something being missed here. I don't know what it is, but this is Mindshock, so we have to consider every possibility. Okay, also apparently there was someone there, a 13-year-old, who remembers her mother seeing a scary looking man in the shopping center that day. He had a beard and was wearing sunglasses. Another man was sitting in a white van with the door open. Now again, I don't know where this information was sourced. So this was back in 2010, various blogs online. It's very strange, but we do have to consider that the guy in the sketch might have had nothing to do with her disappearance because there are too many unknowns. All right, I know that was a bunch of long asides, but I wanted to get them out there just so we're all operating with different possibilities continuing on here. All right, let's go back to James Renner's article. Though Billy Strunak only barely knew Margaret, the 35-year-old donated Times and reams of paper for Amy's posters. Then he sent Margaret 2 decorative pins in the mail, one for her and the other for Amy when she returned. These gifts, as well as the paper, investigators later learned, were stolen from BJ's Wholesale Club where Strunak worked. FBI profiler Robert Ressler had been traveling the country researching a book about serial killers when he and another agent visited Strunak's Fairview Park efficiency under the pretense of thanking him for his help with the volunteer effort. But as Ressler's questions became more pointed, Strunak grew defiant. Ressler asked why Strunak was so involved with the investigation and whether he had taken Amy. Did he pick her up with the best intentions before something went wrong? Maybe she fell and hit her head. Accidents happen. Strunak insisted that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Lacking evidence, Ressler backed off. Halloween came and went that first week, but there was no trick-or-treating on Linford Road. Parents instead went door to door with bags of candy passed through half-open doors to the children inside. As the weeks passed, front-page photos in the newspapers gave way to inside section briefs, which gave way to one-paragraph blurbs. After a while, there was nothing left to report. December 11th marked Amy's 11th birthday. Margaret Mihaljevic threw a small party and friends brought gifts for the missing girl. It was the day Mark Mihaljevic gave up hope. Janet Siebold set out for her jog around 7:30 a.m. on February 8, 1990. The route led her through barren cornfields from County Road 1181 in Ruggles Township, a desolate section of Ashland County, 50 miles southwest of Cleveland. As she approached a small incline across from an access road leading to a sugar mill, Siebold caught a glimpse of lavender fabric and a mop of flaxen hair. Too terrified to look further, she dashed to the house on the corner and banged loudly on the back door. "I think I saw a dead body. Call the police," she screamed. In 14 years with the Ashland County Sheriff's Department, Roger Martin hadn't seen a sight like the one out on 1181. The girl lay face down 12 feet from the side of the road. Her body was badly decomposed. Her teeth had fallen out and sunk into the ground below her. He knew it was the girl he had seen in the posters hung up at the office. He could tell by the blonde hair and the clothes she was still wearing. After 104 days, Amy Mihaljevic had been found. She still wore her sweatpants and lavender shirt, but they had been taken off and put back on. Her boots were nowhere to be found. A single turquoise horsehead earring lay nearby. That's interesting. I believe in other reports they had said they were both missing. In James Renner's article here, it says there was one left. According to the autopsy performed by Cuyahoga County Coroner Elizabeth Balraj, Amy had been struck on the back of the head with a blunt instrument. She had been stabbed 3 or 4 times on the side of the neck. According to Balraj's report, she may have lived 30 minutes after this trauma. It appeared that she had lain in the field for the entire 3 months. "We never ID'd the remains," said Mark Mihaljevic. "There was no sense in it. I never really cared to know." 41 FBI agents descended on Ashland County, some of them dropped from helicopters directly out of headquarters at Quantico, Virginia. Seemingly the route to nowhere, County Road 1181 is nearly 30 minutes from any major highway. The only features in sight are sprawling farms. Harold Bound claimed that he had overheard a man at Holly Hills Farms mentioned the Ashland Lake Gun Club. The farm's manager, Jeff Taylor, denied that there was such a man, and the lead went nowhere. The search had gone cold again. Yeah, that's a little tricky, because was Harold Bound just making stuff up so people wouldn't blame him? And if he's innocent and insane and he can't handle all this stuff, I don't know, would he do that? The past 3 months had been unkind to Billy Strunak. He was interrogated by FBI agents. He broke up with his girlfriend, money was tight, and the psoriasis that ravaged his skin had become unbearable. 2 weeks after Amy's remains were discovered, Strunak poured himself a cup of Coca-Cola for breakfast and mixed it with a gasoline additive. He downed it, then headed to work. That evening, he slipped into a coma. He died 3 days later. It pretty much ate away his stomach and esophagus, says Detective Spatzel. A police search of Strunak's apartment yielded a suicide note that made no mention of Amy. It's interesting. I don't know if the note was ever officially released. and we have only their word that it had no mention of Amy. Again, if we're thinking outside of the box, does law enforcement or FBI have some kind of a plan? Do they somehow suspect there's more than one individual involved? And if Strunak was one of the individuals involved, do they want everybody to think that they don't think he was involved? I don't know. Also, is it a true? How many people try to commit suicide and then go to work? I mean, that's a little strange too. I don't know the statistics of that. The suicide experts can chime in here who have the stats, but you're gonna drink that for breakfast. Now, whether or not you're planning to die or not, why would you go to? I mean, would you go to work? I mean, that doesn't. Yeah, that's a little weird. Okay, so a police search of Strunak's apartment yielded a suicide note that made no mention of Amy. But for Ressler, the FBI profiler, his death was proof enough of his guilt. In his book, Whoever Fights Monsters, published in 1992, Ressler included a chapter on Amy's murder in which he strongly implicated Strunak. Coming out of the interview, I told another agent that my gut said this was the guy he wrote. But the chapter also includes numerous inaccuracies. Ressler mistakenly wrote that Amy was 12 when she was abducted, not 10. I mean, that seems like a weird detail to overlook. And the Strunak family, he wrongly claimed, had discarded all evidence before police and FBI could conduct a search of his apartment. He described the site where her body was found as being right off I-71, when in fact it was winding 15 miles away. And I don't know, in this article, Renner is claiming that Ressler wrongly claimed that the Strunak family discarded all evidence. There were other local rumors that this was done. So I don't know who's getting information from where, but Stressler might not have made that up, because there were rumors of the sort that things could have been taken from Strunak's place. Not necessarily his family, but let's say if Strunak was not acting alone and he did have evidence there, whoever other guilty parties, they may have went through his place. Also, do we know for certain that Strunak drank that willingly? Is it possible, again, if there was more than one perpetrator, they wanted him out of the picture? Was it conclusively proven that note was in his writing? And if it was, did he write that note at gunpoint, at someone else pointing a gun at him? I don't know. And then, of course, if this is someone who's also suffering from mental illness or mental issues, we can't assume he would have just went to work and told people. If he's that scared or mentally insane, I mean, we really don't know the situation. It's impossible to say. Though he had spent only a weekend in Bay Village during the time Amy was missing, Ressler thought he knew better than the feds who had pursued her killer for months. This made Wren furious. Those of us who were closely associated with the investigation do not believe that Strunak was the individual involved in that abduction and homicide, he says. Because of that book, people might not have come forward with important information. They thought it was solved. A year after Amy's body was recovered, Wren closed the command post at the Bay Police Station and returned to his Cleveland office in defeat. What little evidence there was had pointed nowhere. New tips slowed to a trickle after the release of Ressler's book. Short of someone confessing, it seemed Amy's killer would never be found. The Mihaljevics' marriage, troubled before Amy's abduction, finally dissolved later that year. The divorce is probably more of a result of what happened, says Mark. It wasn't everything, but it was the icing on the cake. Margaret and Jason lived in the house on Linford Road until '92, when she bought a smaller place in town. She became a victims' rights advocate for Ohio Attorney General Lee Fisher until Betty Montgomery replaced him in '95. In August 2000, she moved in with her elderly mother in Las Vegas. The following year, she died there. The coroner's report cited chronic alcoholism. She was buried next to Amy's cremated remains in a family plot in Wisconsin. To the end, Margaret believed that the man who murdered her daughter was still alive. On Sunday, October 13th, 2002, parishioners at St. Angela Merici Roman Catholic Church in Fairview Park had just started taking communion when the shaggy-haired man began shouting from his pew, "May I have your attention, please? My name is Richard Allen Fulbert. People know me as Satan. I killed Amy Mihaljevic." Off-duty policeman Thomas Zinsmeyer and 2 auxiliary officers grabbed the man and took him into custody. A schizophrenic 42-year-old who vaguely resembled the composite sketch of Amy's abductor. Fulbert had skipped taking his medication for at least 3 weeks. He had randomly selected St. Angela to reveal his secret. He told investigators that Satan was trying to frame him for Amy's murder. She had been killed to silence him before he could warn the world of impending doom. Detective Spatzel questioned Fulbert inside the Fairview Park police station. He had nothing to do with Amy's murder, Spatzel concluded. I will stand by these statements, Fulbert says today with unwavering eyes. I do feel I'm responsible for the death of Amy Mihaljevic. He also believes Hillary Clinton is the Antichrist. Fulbert wrote about these intuitions in a 184-page memoir for sale on the internet titled Buy the Truth, Do Not Sell It. That's an interesting title. Completed earlier this year, it includes references to Amy's abduction throughout. Read in its entirety, the book merely serves as singular insight into the workings of a schizophrenic mind. He was just a nut, says FBI Special Agent Gary Bellumini, who worked with Wren on Amy's case. We had a lot of people like that. And of course, that makes investigation much more difficult when you have all of these crazies coming out of the woodwork to claim credit, especially when some of the crazies look like the sketch. On the day Amy Mihaljevic disappeared, Detective Mark Spatzel visited her class to talk about safety. Today, he remains on the Bay Force mentoring young detectives. Amy is his lone case. When a tip comes in, they're most frequent in the days following new abductions. He weighs the new information against existing evidence and shares it with the FBI's new case manager. A break may be around the corner. DNA samples can now be compared to those in a national database of convicted felons that's maintained by the FBI. Last month, Spatzel sent his evidence to be retested with new forensic equipment. He won't discuss specific details of the evidence in question. Spatzel believes that someone other than the murderer has knowledge of the crime, and he hopes that person will pick up the phone. From the sheer guilt of this, they would have talked to somebody at some point, he says. That's the call I'm waiting for. And on another aside here, he seems to think that it was a sole... From these comments, it seems that he's alleging that it's a sole perpetrator who might have spoken to somebody about it, as opposed to more than one perpetrator who all have inside knowledge from direct involvement. Harold Bound still receives outpatient treatment at the VA hospital, and he lives in a group home on the border of Tremont. He looks older than his 57 years. Meaty jowls hang underneath thick-tinted glasses. The last strands of his dyed red hair are slicked across his head. His voice is nasal and meek. Most nights he can be found at church. A couple days a week he drives to Brecksville for group therapy. He's able to live off his disability checks in addition to what he makes organizing hunting trips for area travel agencies and bartering at gun shows. I can't prove one way or another I didn't do it, he says of Amy's killing. He admits to having bouts of uncontrollable violence in 1989, but he says he hadn't had a problem for the past 10 years. Back then, he failed 2 FBI lie detector tests because of stress, he claims. He still holds contempt for the agents who grilled him. I have problems with voices. I still hear them. I'm glad I don't know who the FBI agents are. I'm glad I can't recognize them anymore. At one point in the conversation, Bound claims that he couldn't pick out Amy if she were standing in a lineup of 10 girls. Later, he says that he used to watch her from his apartment at Holly Hill Farms. He remembers seeing Margaret drop Amy off for lessons one day. They appeared to be fighting. Amy got out, and Margaret threw her boots out the window before driving away. Amy sat alone in the gravel parking lot. That's when I met her, Bound says. She was putting on her boots. He went up to the girl and asked whether she needed help. Amy wouldn't talk to him, so he walked away. I mean, that's a sad story on a whole bunch of different levels. But if that's true, I mean, apparently, and that was the first time that he met her, And again, this was before she was riding her bike unsupervised to the place, to the riding area. So this is yeah, these are weird details. Detective Spatzel dances around the subject of Bound. Was Harold Bound a suspect? Yes. Was he ever ruled out? No, I don't think so, he allows. He did take lie detector tests and probably failed them, but barring any new evidence, there's nothing that could lead to an arrest. Harold Bound's brother, Greg, lives on the second floor of a ramshackle house not far from Harold's place. He knows his family will be associated with Amy's death until other proof emerges. And he says what the FBI will not. Yes, my brother is the main suspect. We'll return to him later and how a lot of investigators actually said Harold Bound is the only guy that they would rule out for sure, or relatively sure, whereas all the other suspects are still on the table. But to finish out James Renner's article here, when Kristen Sabo's mother told her that Amy's body had finally been found, that her best friend really was dead, she didn't say a word. She walked slowly to her bedroom and then destroyed it, ripping up pictures, throwing toys at the wall. Amy, how could you be so stupid? She shouted. 16 years have not softened her memory of that day. She knows what Amy would have done once she realized she was in danger. She would have fought and fought and fought to the death of her, she says, her eyes suddenly shiny, her gaze trailing off to an indefinite point in space. Her mother, Jeannie, purses her lips together. Whoever it is, he's been living a life for 16 years, and she hasn't, she says. She was my ragamuffin. So, poignant article from James Renner going over a lot of issues with the case. So, I'm actually going to end the podcast here. I don't want to turn this into a 4 or 5 hour one like the Kurt Cobain one. If you haven't checked that one out, check it out. There's just so much more to go over. And the next one we'll start off with as most definitive timeline as we can. And then we'll go over all of the suspects and curiosities and, of course, teachers at school and all of the lead suspects, pros and cons against them, and keeping in mind the whole time that it might not be a single perpetrator. And that's kind of where I wanted to leave this off, just and mention it throughout this entire podcast. There might be some unknown. Clearly there's a bunch of known unknowns. So things we want to know that have no answer. But there are things that we haven't even thought of to come up with. These are the unknown unknowns. And one of these might actually be the critical key to solving this case. And if we don't even keep it in mind, if we think that everything must have happened a particular way, or it must have been a guy acting alone, or it must have been a guy from out of town, or it must have been a guy from in town, then the case might remain unsolved. So there's also new DNA evidence with multiple suspects. And yeah, there's a lot to go over. Actually, I will leave one more thing here regarding the body being found, because this was curious. So Janet Siebold said she did not see Amy's body the day before. Her husband, who rode a bike past the area, said it was definitely not there just a few weeks before, because he rode his bike past. And remember, it was only 12 feet from the road or so at the time it was found anyway. So we don't know if it was moved by coyotes or whatever the case may be. But the theory that it was there the entire 3 months, I don't know. Again, there's a lot of conflicting information there too, as well as with everything, because this case is a really bizarre case. So, hope you guys found this informative and comprehensive, like all Mindshock podcasts. And this deep dive will continue We've barely scratched the surface here, but I hope I've laid down a nice mind-shocking foundation with a lot of mind shocks and plenty more to come. Of course, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, or you can just go to youtube.com/mindshock. Keep awareness up in this case and other unsolved cases. Like this podcast, share it across social media platforms, of which you could find us on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings, theories of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire, signing off. Catch you guys next time.